Hello again, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Tom Nelson, and this is a continuation of the Diabetes Control program, the course. This is video lesson number 10. It's a continuation of step number 4. That's step 4 of the 6 steps to gaining complete control over your diabetes. This is part 3, and we're going to talk about the different types of exercise, aerobic versus anaerobic. Aerobic exercise involves a longer-term, lower exertion and less demand on your muscles. Its muscles are not required to use their full contracting force or their capacity. They use a higher percentage of the type of muscle fibers that consume a mixture of oxygen and fat, which will produce very little lactic acid, that substance that causes muscle pain if you do very vigorous exercise. Anaerobic exercise requires short bursts of high-intensity contractions that require full contraction and minimal force, like weightlifting or sprinting. Anaerobic exercise, on the other hand, uses mostly type 2 fast-twitch muscle fibers, and it relies mainly on that ATP energy or glucose for fuel. Since it involves very little oxygen, very little fat or protein is burned. Fat will only burn in the presence of oxygen. When you're doing aerobic exercise, you're only breathing to the point where you can still breathe easily through your nose and carry on a conversation. But when you get into anaerobic, that's a very different scenario. You're pushing yourself to the point where your lungs and your heart can't keep up with the oxygen requirements of your cells in producing energy, so you're forced to breathe through your mouth, and it'd be very difficult for you to carry on a conversation. So some exercises are going to use a combination of aerobic and anaerobic muscle fibers, like rock climbing or soccer, where you may not be going full out all of the time. So elliptical machines, bicycles, treadmills, they can all be a good example of the types of exercise like I just suggested. So if the intensity is set high enough, you can reach the anaerobic level, or low enough, you can easily reach the aerobic level. So smooth muscles, involuntary muscles, are located within the walls of your organs and structures like your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines, your bladder, your blood vessels, and others. And the cardiac muscle, found inside your muscle tissues of the heart, are also going to be a little bit different. They use so much energy that they literally have 10,000 power plants inside each cell. The same is true of your brain. So you can realize that just your heart under normal conditions and really extensive during exercise, those 10,000 power plants are going to be producing a lot of energy. So your cells store the glucose, again, in the form of glycogen. Whenever glucose enters a cell, it's converted by enzymes into that compact form called glycogen, and then also there will be fatty acids, so either of those can be used as fuel. And again, your thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, are stored internally and they're in your bloodstream. So your metabolism determines the rate of fuel consumption and the ATP energy that's going to be generated. Recall in that last video how we talked about if you are active, if you are exercising vigorously, that your body will adjust for that and create all of the constituents and components that are needed to produce massive amounts of that energy. And so the muscles that are demanding it can consume all of that additional energy. So oxygen is also stored in the bloodstream as well as inside the cells, as we said before. The mitochondria, the power generators, are what I call the power plants. The number of them is going to vary by your muscle type and how intensive they generally are in use in terms of your exercise or your activity. The ATP that is stored in them in resting muscles is going to be there in the event that it's needed. If you're a more active person, more ATP will be stored. If you're a couch potato, very little will be stored. So energy is generally used up very quickly, within a matter of seconds. And the ATP is generated by burning glucose and or fatty acids, depending on how much oxygen is available. So if you are doing aerobic exercise, you're going to be able to produce enough oxygen so that the cells can burn fatty acids and glucose together, whichever it chooses, as long as you're doing that aerobic exercise. It's going to be able to produce the oxygen that's required in order to burn fat, because again, fat will only burn in the presence of oxygen. So if you get into the anaerobic phase of exercise, where your lungs and heart can't keep up with the oxygen requirements, then your body's going to convert into a ketosis state, where you're going to burn mostly glucose without oxygen, or fatty acids with little oxygen. It's not going to be a very efficient process, and not a whole lot of energy is going to be produced. It's going to be limited time-wise because it can't keep up with that pace for very long. So your muscles will consume the most energy pretty much of anywhere in your body when you're exercising. So oxygen is stored in the bloodstream and inside the cells so that it's there when it's needed to be called upon whenever you get even more active. So cells store the glucose, the glycogen, and the fatty acids so that there is fuel available for when those power plants are called upon to produce quick energy and large amounts of it. So your metabolism is going to determine the rate that the fuel consumption is used. In other words, how fast all of those power plants are working and how quickly they're producing that ATP energy in their generating process. So now proceed to lesson number 10, part number 4. We're going to talk about diabetes and exercise. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Please pay it forward and share what you learn with others. Thank you.